Okay, we are rolling. Thank you all for coming out, showing up to this chat with Vic Rawlings and Jeff Silva, the creators, the makers of the film Linefork that you just watched. And thank you, Vic and Jeff, for having me here with y'all. It's a true honor. It's an absolute privilege to be here with you to remember, celebrate the life and music of Lee Sexton. Jumping right into it, this documentary of yours is, there are many words that come to mind when I try to describe it, but meditative is one of them. Your documentary is meditative, and we all just watched it and saw that it's pacing, and it captures the singular world of Mr. Sexton, the world that he came from, and in a way, a world that he seemed to define. It's an atmosphere that might seem mythical to some, right? Of coal trains and dogs and moonshine, the expansive Appalachian mountain range. But it was a very real and personal place to him. And this film of yours holds both of these elements in balance. And in doing so, it does away with any cliche or convenient mischaracterization of people or place. I think I found that you all looked at Lee and Opal fairly as complex human beings, and the same with the region, a complicated land with a complicated history. One of the techniques you use to accomplish this is the very beginning scene, the long shot of that train from above, from beginning to end. Man, that is sonically a powerful moment too. It trains our ears and our eyes to understand what we're about to enter. This initial experience teaches the viewer how to watch the film. The DNA of the entire artistic project is just right there. You show us how to enter and understand what you're doing. There will be no talking heads, no voiceovers, no easy explanations. And you seem to believe and even insist through this decision that everything we need to know is right there in front of our eyes, right there in our ears, and it's all within the image and the sound. This places a burden of exactitude on the filmmaker. So my question for you is, how did you decide to open with the shot of the train? Was it your first impulse, or did it take a while to decide on that?
You want to hit that, Vic? Or you want me to?
Well,
you should go.
We can do a little tag team on this. I'd say we just went out and tried to gather what we could. And that shot was serendipitous. We heard the train. We were driving along the road that runs parallel to that train track, and probably did some dumb driving to get there in time to beat the train. I'm glad we got it. And I think that I think you put it very well, Lee. It requires, you have to slow down. And particularly in the cinema, that's loud. That's intended to be loud. It's intended to be almost frightening. It should be on the edge of scary. It's telling you that you've come to a different place, and now this is happening. So yeah, it's it could have, if it wasn't there, I don't know how we would have started the film. I mean, it was really lucky to have it. I mean, luck is really important. What do you think, Jeff?
I think that serendipity is a nice word, actually. And for me, serendipity is a mixture of luck or chance with wisdom, with a little bit of informed understanding of how things are happening, and through the immersive process, because what really pays off in the end is spending time there with Lee and with Opal, but also in the landscape and sonically and visually, probably not meditating, but in a contemplative state, thinking about how we can tune in to the corporeally to the sensory experience of being there and of being with Lee and being with Opal. And so, yeah, when we hit that, the trains were passing by rather regularly, in fact, but we were never really well situated to film it, but for that one moment. And I do remember when we captured it, I think we had a problem with the SD card. In fact, it was corrupted, and we thought we had lost the media. We were able to retrieve it back when we got back to Boston, but and my memory, if my memory serves me, even in the first version of that 3.5 hour, 4 hour cut we made, that was the first shot. So it's been there a long time. Mm-hmm. And it just felt like, in order to establish a sense of rhythm and place, and to tune you in as a spectator, that, as you so eloquently said, Lee, that was part of our intentions, and I feel really good about that choice, actually.
Well, you should, because it's a brilliant opening, and I think that all good books and movies and stories and music, they all teach. We have to learn how to read them. We have to learn how to see them. We have to learn how to listen to them. And they operate on their own rules, and it's our job to accept it and figure it out. And so it's really amazing to know that was there with you, that the train was there with y'all for so long before you really understood, okay, this is the gateway, this is the bridge, this is what's carrying it all. So it's, and yeah, the experience of hearing it, if anybody, God bless laptops. We're all probably staring at our laptops right now, but if you can get a good pair of headphones or a room full of huge, powerful speakers and listen to that train, it's a whole different thing. Let it overwhelm you. I would recommend you do that for yourself. So let me back up just a little bit from the beginning of the movie, even prior to that. When and where did you all first hear Lee Sexton, his playing, or hear about him? Was it through a recording? And if so, which one? And what did it sound like to you when you first heard it? I'm asking this because my first time, I believe, was the Smithsonian Folkways recordings, and I think it was pretty poly, and it sounded so elemental to me. Like there was a lonesome sound in it that spoke to me, and this was a tune I grew up playing, but never like Lee played it on that recording that I heard. It felt like I was suddenly getting closer to the source, like a musical birthplace in a way. So that was kind of my initial experience of hearing him and Pretty Polly. And the same with, I have heard, I think later, I think it's Fox Chase, that And that's another tune that I grew up hearing fiddlers play. But Lee's version of that one, it rushes forward in such a headlong way that, to my young years, hearing some of those recordings that were steeped in so I was steeped in bluegrass, so I recognized it, but it was very different, right? And at that time, to my parents' dismay, I was really getting interested in like punk rock music and stuff. And
Yeah.
Lee Sexton's Fox Chase made a lot of sense to me on both of those levels.
Yes.
It's totally wild and wily, and it's untamable. So can you describe the first time you heard him? When and where, how did you first encounter him, and what was it like?
Well, I want to say, I want to thank my first banjo teacher, Gretchen Bowder, for handing me this CD version of Mountain Music of Kentucky, and Jeff for buying me this one on vinyl. It was, for me, those are the records that you're talking about, and that have. He's also got "Fly Around My Pretty Little Miss" on there, which, I mean, it's straight punk rock. It's just, if it was another, it would be hardcore. It's just as hard and fast as it possibly can be, and there's nothing there except the song. It's a hammer. It's a hammer flying through the air. um, I mean, he hits it so hard and so clean, and it's fast, and it's got that sort of like that punk speed and energy. Um, and that's not, I mean, it's impossible to miss. I mean, that stuff jumps off of Mountain Music of Kentucky. I mean, I like all kinds. There's some really beautiful, more subtle old time things there too. And for Lee's, overall music, I love the subtle stuff as much or more. But those early recordings, it's rock and roll. It's
Yeah,
nothing
really
but rock and
pushes.
roll. It's happening on a banjo, but it's rock and roll. I mean, it's directly that. I don't think you have a stretch to make.
His tempo pushes ahead of itself, and it's very headlong in those early recordings. I mean, it feels like it's really trying to break the seams, like the whatever contains it. It's pressing up against the walls.
It could be Bad Brains. It could. I mean, it's very far over the top. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not classic rock.
That's what
It's
seems
punk rock.
that's what seems very singular to me about his sound. Those early, like, just how forward it's moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just say that's the life force. And if you spend any time with Lee, you encounter that he had that, a couple of years ago. I think it's been a couple of years since I've been down to visit, but I mean, he had that then. That same energy, that same vitality. That's who he was. That's what he brought. So, I mean,
And you
those
see that
recordings.
turn on with the when he picks up the banjo, you see that sort of shift, that energy force just comes rushing in on him. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, his tone and the tempo, it's all it's life affirming.
Yes.
And yeah, I love listening to that, and it's hard to forget the first time experiencing that sound.
Yes.
It seems like it was, very close to the source of, where it comes from. I mean, it seems like it's made out of, the essential materials.
If I could say too, I mean, like, it's his essential materials. I mean, he's definitely representing the style and the tradition, but you also get a real strong sense of him as an individual, and that he's holding both of those things at the same time. I don't present myself as an expert on that tradition. I've spent a little bit of time there, but really with any musician, you can tell when they are honest and they have when you're listening to that person. And Lee always sounded like Lee.
Mm.
That much I can say.
In line with that, so that's his music and how recognizable it is, but you mentioned a little bit about what it was like just meeting him too. So what was it like? So we've talked kind of about the first time hearing him, just the music and the recording, but then to meet the person, what was it like, and how did that happen? How did you come about meeting him? What's the story behind that?
Well, the first time I went down there to visit him was 2004, and I had already been playing for a while, but and I went down there to I wanted to find out if there was still, like, these recordings were all done in the same geographical area, and I wondered about what was still happening in that scene, if there was still a strong scene there or not. So I went there, and I asked people. Lee, if you look at Lee's picture in this brochure, these are the liner notes. He's young, and maybe he's still alive. And he was, and people told me how to get to where he lived, and I pulled up totally unannounced and scared to death, not knowing what I was walking into, just off of faith, going for it. Carrying prejudices, of course, coming from the outside, not knowing. And it was the warmest welcome I may have ever received anywhere in the world, from anyone. He's on his porch waving me in as I'm driving into his driveway. And about 3 minutes later, there's the master tone, and it was overwhelming. I'll never forget that moment in my life. He welcomed me immediately. As soon as I get out of the car, he welcomed me immediately into his house. So
it sounds like he was not only open to your visit, but open to sharing what he knew. And I mean, the fact that the music was there immediately. As a teacher myself, and I see him not only, I mean, your film showcases him just as much as a teacher and someone who imparts knowledge as a performer, or it's all inseparable really in his world. So that's a very generous spirit. So you mentioned his banjo and kind of what kind of banjo it is. Can you talk a little bit about the development of his musical style as you understand it? How did he get such a sound? And we've talked already, and it's about this, and it's obviously about that feeling, the approach, the soul, the intensity, the intent that he put into those strings when he touched them. But there's also the more technical aspect of things like his claw hammer style, the drop thumb style, and the two finger style. These styles are different than the more like modern three finger style of Scruggs and others. Yet Lee Sexton felt he could do anything a three finger player could do with what he had.
yes.
I know at one point in an interview he claims that his broken right middle finger curved just right, quote, for the drop thumb style. It's an amazing mention, and the thinking about it now, claw hammer and two finger style often go hand in hand in tunes like Rubin's Train. I know Fred Cockrum was known to begin that tune with the two finger style, then at some point switched to claw hammer. So two-finger banjo playing is an interesting in-between sort of place between claw hammer and three-finger, yet as you've told me in the past, Vic, like it's wrong to try and even separate them and categorize them as these things that aren't completely in conversation with each other. Did Lee choose this picking style of his? I know it was taught to him, yet also he had a singular sound. So how much of it was his choice, or in a way, did it choose him? Or a little of both? Did he adapt? I ask this because I remember a story about a hand injury that might have shaped his sound. And these are fascinating stories about the fate of a musician's approach to the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
So not to mention Lee's perseverance and tenacity. So was he able to turn an injury into a gift? How did he develop his approach to the banjo? And can you talk about this story about what happened to his hand and the stories surrounding that?
Well, he told the story of being being in the mine, and he was on a vehicle that's, that there's the ceiling's real low, and he had his hand resting on a part of the machine, and it went over a bump, and his hand got smashed in between the machine and the roof of where he was. And that caused his middle finger to go off at an angle, which you can see if you look closely at his right hand. And there was a later injury that he's described about having his thumb being bitten by a raccoon. A raccoon got into his trash, and he's trying to get rid of the raccoon, and the raccoon got him on the thumb, which caused, I think, some. I believe that he said that caused some nerve damage and some numbness in his thumb. But I mean, I'd say too, in terms of the learning, he talked a lot about learning from his uncle Morgan. I should got if anybody. This is an Apple shop thing here. If you've got a chance to pick up if you like Lee's sound, Morgan Sexton's sound is really super brilliant. There's nothing to say. Morgan was a two-finger player mostly, from what I've seen in an Apple shop film, and he also did an upstroke style. So it's kind of like clawhammer, where clawhammer you come down to make the melody note. With upstroke you pick up and get that. It's the same kind of rhythm as the clawhammer, but those two styles, the upstroke and the two-finger, really mesh in a beautiful way rhythmically. And you hear this in like, if you look at tunes like Little Birdie and the older things, and that's another thing I'd say about so. And if you listen to the Morgan recordings, it's incredibly light. It's got this ethereal, light, floating quality to it. It doesn't have that drivingness. That it doesn't have that punk rock. It's the other end of the spectrum. So, I mean, and Lee occupied all of that space at different times. And I would say, having learned from Morgan, his uncle Morgan, and his cousin Roscoe, and a few other people too that I can't recall their names right now, and also being situated at a time, he's born in like 1927, so as he's coming, he's starting to play at around 8, and at around that time you have radio is starting to happen with bluegrass, and that sound is starting to get heard. And so then I think that also obviously informed his sound. That's what I'm hearing. Is you have those older techniques, and then you have this new sound, and he was still getting that. A lot of it, really directly referencing that bluegrass three-finger sound with two-finger picking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So but in the most recent time that I saw him, he used to use picks all the time for two-finger playing, a thumb pick and an index pick. He'd use a Dunlop. It was a white plastic thumb pick, nothing fancy. You can get them pretty much everywhere you go, and nothing fancy. A Dunlop steel, I think 18 gauge index finger pick. Chevy Nova, nothing fancy about it. You can spend, those are like, both of those are probably, $2 for the pair. And I think you can pay probably, $15 for a thumb pick these days. So Lee used very basic materials and got what he got out of them. But I'd say in terms of style, the last time I was down there, he said he was choosing actively not to use picks at all. That he was more interested in getting the older style, the softer sound. He was going back to that earlier sound. That you can only assume that, like when he was an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, learning from his uncle and his cousin, and I think Jeff, I think he may have mentioned that he learned from his mother.
I don't remember him talking about learning from his mother. I mean, he talked about learning from his dad until his accident, but I don't remember him talking about
like
his mother.
somewhere there was some mention, but I'd have to go back and look at some of that footage.
Yeah.
But I do think that
some of that, there's been some active choices. There's definitely been some active choices, and there's also been some placement in time that I think is really, the effects of that are clear.
Mm-hmm. Vic, can you tell me briefly that story about Lee receiving the award, and this has to do with
I just heard
the finger injury.
I just heard this story I just talked to Lee's son Johnny, and Johnny told me this. You can never retell Lee's stories. And I'm going to try to retell one of Johnny's. I'm going to fail at this one too, but so we were talking about Lee's, this finger is injured and it goes off at an angle, and Johnny told a story about Lee receiving the governor's award in 1999. Kentucky Governor Paul Patton, you may remember from the book scene there. And they had all the people come for a big party, and they have a big open bar and the banquet and the whole thing, and everybody's suits and ties, and of course Lee goes in his overalls because that's who he is, and he always represented who he was very proudly. And everybody gets a little turn at the lectern, and receives their award and little applause for everybody. And the way that Johnny told the story is that Lee goes up to the lectern and introduces himself by name and tells everybody that he's a retired coal miner and that he injured his hand in the mines. And he showed him which finger. And that the place, so at this point, he's giving the bird to the entire Kentucky state legislature. As a retired coal miner who's gotten an injury in the mines, I think you can fill in the blanks, but that's Lee Sexton. Who else can do that? So you meet somebody like that. You meet somebody who's got that to do, and that's a special person. You want to do something with that. You want to be around that.
Amazing story. So
I'll just add on my end that if it weren't for Vic, I never would have heard of Lee Sexton either. It's Vic was there in 2004, and we've known each other since 97 or so. I don't know, a long time now.
6, 7.
Yeah, 96, 97. Time flies. And so and we've worked together on projects, and he came back enthusiastic on that trip, and I think shared with me some music. And then it was back in 2012 when you said, Jeff, there's something here we gotta do, And when he played some music and some conversations that they had recorded, I was really, really touched by the music, even though I'm not a musician, but also by just his persona of Lee from those recordings. It just transcended the mini disc recording or whatever it was, and I wanted to meet this person. I wanted to get to know him. I wanted to know the music, and it's a special person.
I mean, when I first heard those recordings, I also said, I mean, this is, yeah, it's a person you want to meet. It's a sound you want to hear in the real. And and it just has that quality. It makes you lean in and want to come closer. There's also, your film takes on certain qualities like that. It's very nuanced. It invites us in to look and listen as deeply and take away what we can from it. So I think that it learned from Lee's teaching also, in its nature. It's inviting yet mysterious and funny and adventurous spirit. So that all feels like it's very there. Here's a big question now that we're about halfway through this, so we might as well. This is not the final question, but here's the climactic question, the big one of like, who's going to fill their shoes? Because we lost Lee recently. And I ask it because right around the time of Lee Sexton's death, I lost a musical mentor of my own, Milford Graves. And at first glance, these two musicians might seem completely opposite from each other. And it's been a really amazing experience thinking of these two men and holding that, just kind of like feeling the gravity of those two. They obviously did not know each other. I mean, Milford Graves was from the housing projects in Jamaica, Queens, New York. And he made a name for himself playing free jazz and practicing a kind of music therapy medicine for the heart later in his life. And he played with people like Albert Ayler. He played at John Coltrane's funeral, and he was singular in this way. Lee Sexton grew up in the coal country of Eastern Kentucky and played a very old style rooted deeply in tradition. And it's interesting that later in his life, he was going backward toward the older sounds, even that, as Vic was just mentioning. So at first, in many ways, these are different guys. Yet Mr. Sexton and Professor Graves were both leaders in their communities. They were both storytellers. They're both teachers.
Yes.
They're both individuals with close proximity to the source. Maybe they even were the source. Jake McGinskey's documentary on Milford Graves, it's called Full Mantis. It came out in close timing with Linefork, and we know that the amount of work it takes to put together these things both of these took many years of compiling and editing. So it's out of our hands at a certain point when it's done. It just gets done when it's done. And somehow these came out for the amount of time they both took to create. They came out at a similar period of time. And also their deaths recently are not so far apart. A few days, Vic?
2 days.
2 days.
Okay.
So the similarities are just stunning to me, and I've just been thinking about this. And to lose these guys is like losing a natural resource. And it makes me wonder who's going to fill their shoes. Any thoughts? I have a thought about this question, but it's one that we start to think about a lot, right? Because these are this is as close to that music kind of as you can get, and then it's gone.
Well, I think both of these musicians did their best to teach people to. They had a lot to say, and they wanted people to hear it, and it wasn't all just what would go on a recording. Really, a way of life. You know, both of these people were willing to share that. And I'd say, you know, specifically who's going to fill their shoes. I mean, referencing people in Linefork, I'd say Brett Ratliff and John Haywood, who show up in the film. Those are two people. And hundreds of other students that Lee's taught.
Absolutely.
Some of them will fill those shoes. I would hope. I mean, I think Milford's got people who are going to be doing the best that they can to fill his shoes. But at the same time, I'd say for both of these people, both of these teachers, they're really in their living, they're embodying an individual spirit and an individual voice, a specific voice coming from, but really a very specific iteration of that tradition. And if you think of what Milford did to push his genre of music and what Lee did to push his genre, no one sounds like these people. These are very significant. These are not guys you just call up to fill out a gig. These are, it's not that. I don't know what, but these are individual musician artists who are out there doing their own thing. So that's, what do you think, Jeff?
I think that yeah, it's an interesting and difficult question, and I think everybody that met Lee, he was touched in some ways by him, whether that be musically or just, you know, as a human being. You know, he had this aura about him, and he was a teacher, and that's important. And he taught, even though I'm not a musician and I couldn't play a note on the banjo to save my life, he taught me something as well. He taught us the 4 Ps, which I think is like boils down the essence of his philosophy of living, which is the 4 Ps for him were practice, patience, perseverance, and passion. And if you keep those 4 things, you're going to be all right. You're gonna you know, live a full life. And that first day that I met Lee, he told us about that as his philosophy, and I found that incredibly inspiring, and I feel that he embodied that fully, and it's something that I hope that the film also, in some ways, captures some of that spirit of Lee that can touch other people. You know, if we can't meet Lee anymore. We can't go to his house, but if we can still grasp a trace of him through that film, then for me, I feel really proud.
What a beautiful answer to that question. I'm sure it took all 4 of those P's for y'all to finish the making of this film, right?
Yep, it did.
And one of my favorite, it's hard to boil it down really, but one of my favorite scenes is toward the end of Lee handing the banjo out of the frame, and that to me speaks to the answer of who's going to fill their shoes. It's out there, and he's giving it
off screen.
So
Yeah.
it's out there. It's an amazing moment where that kind of the frame breaks. We understand the whole world around him. We sense it. And it's nearly impossible to summarize him, and also impossible to summarize a film like this. There's no takeaway other than the entire whole. That said, what to you is the aboutness of the film? What is it about? If you had to answer that, you don't have to, but I would appreciate it. To me, it's more than music. That's probably where it started. To me, it seems that it's about time, and it's about aging. It's about mortality. And in that way, it's ultimately about life and our time on the planet and what we choose to do with it. So another favorite moment of mine, in addition to the train that begins it and teaches us how to enter it, in addition to the end of breaking past the frame, and to who is out there listening, there's also an amazing moment when Lee reads his biography in that book. It's an amazing moment of context, of him looking back at his younger self. He becomes the only talking head in a documentary about him, right? suddenly Lee Sexton is reading in third person about his younger self, so he's the talking head of younger Lee Sexton. It's like an amazing moment.
Right out of this book. He's reading out of this book.
Hands in Harmony, yeah.
Yeah.
Hands in Harmony. Yeah. And he's sitting there with that book, reading it, and he becomes the one who provides context to his life. The good old days. I also love the end scene again, where he reaches out, but that one of him reading that, and it suddenly has this kind of more omniscient perspective. And again, that just, to me, is what it's about, this idea of time and life, and what we do with that, our time. So what would your answer be? What is it about? Or what have people told you that they think it's about? Because the movie is very nuanced, and it invites those types of interpretations. This is not a how to play clawhammer, but it might inspire that. This is not a be all end all who was Lee Sexton. It hints at things, and he gives a good reading of, but it asks us to do homework if we want to learn more, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But so in that way, it's about something else. It can inspire all of that stuff, but this is the vision is quite ambitious. So, what are some reactions of people's interpretations? What they think it is? What do you think it is? You don't have to say. I know it's a really kind of a stupid question. It is what it is, but to you, what is it about?
Mr. Silva?
Well, I'll see what I can do about that. For me, the experience of going down to Linefork, of going to Eastern Kentucky, was a new experience for me that was powerful. And I have a background in ethnography, and so culture is really important to me and my practice, and how to find ways to not to make films about people or on a subject, but to make them with people and to be with people and to share an experience. And so the act of going down to Linefork and spending many days and trips back and forth with Lee and Opal is an act of sharing time and sharing experience. And that goes way beyond the screen. I mean, we're talking hundreds of hours and weeks and things. And so the film tries to whittle down that experience as best it can to 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 give forth to the spectator that little space um, between them and the screen and us, between Lee and Opal and us, to share that space again. And so for me, that's what the film is about. It's about inviting it's about being in the living room with Lee and Opal, being on the porch, being in their garden, and sharing that time and tuning in as much as possible without prejudgment, without assumption, to say, okay, I'm here and I don't know anything and I want to understand, but I want to understand not just the details of what's happening and why, but I want to understand with my body, the sounds of the nature, the sounds of the dogs, the music, all of those things. And what we tried to do collectively is to try to be in it, to tune into it, and to then whittle through and sort through and put something together that tells a narrative story. That's I don't know if I answered the question, but that's the best I got. You got some more details there, Vic?
I was gonna say, I mean, that's beautiful, beautifully said. I mean, I can pretty much ditto that. To say that, like, I mean, I found myself frustrated coming back from trips down there and trying to tell, you know, like in like 2004, 2006, in those trips, trying to describe to people what it was like to be there, and it was impossible. And to give people an experience of being in that, really to be in that place and to experience those people and to experience how does time feel when you're there, and how different that was from where I was living in Boston at that time. And just how what a difference it was in actuality from the life that I was living, and also how different it was from what I was expecting. I had no idea what to expect other than, you know, the errant ideas that are in the culture, and trying to filter through all of that. Where was I going to? But really, the experience of being with these people and having time in that space, and uh, wanting to convey that experience. And obviously, it's, you know, part of my hope for the film was, you know, in the beginning was to, you know, expand awareness of the music, but really, the more time you spend there, you realize that's really that is a fraction of the story here. And that might be the thing that gets you there. That might be the thing that you go to that place for. But
Yeah.
if you're paying attention, there's a lot more happening.
It's a great expansive answer. I mean, I'm hearing a lot about time, people, a sense of place,
Yeah.
and um,
And I would say too, I mean, there's a mythic quality to this too. Like this image, I'm looking at this image in the background. I mean, this is a mythic image. Like if you're not from the place where this is, and you see this from 1,000 miles away, you can't relate to it. It doesn't exist in your life. And going to a different place, it would be if I go to, I don't know, I've never been to Peru. I've never been to I've never been to Alaska. I don't know what goes on in Alaska. So I think just coming to a concrete experience of a place was really so powerful for me. I can only say.
Yeah, I
Place,
agree with that.
place and time and being with people. Thank you. First question from a user, from a question from someone with the username Senorton, Senorton, is right about that book that you held up, Vic. This is the question: what was that book that Lee was reading from, which had that photo and text about him? Could you mention a little bit more information about that book?
Yeah, this is, I mean, the name of the book is Hands, I don't know if that's coming through correct, but the title is Hands in Harmony. It's by Tim Barnwell. And it's a, it's kind of a classic sort of, like here's, I think Lee's line when he's talking about it, they take a big picture of you. I think that's a line that he speaks when he's in the chair and he's about to read his bio he's reading from a page like this. And for me, it was particularly interesting seeing Lee talk about the process of being documented. And there was one, like, I think with they'd take a picture of you, and just explaining that sort of that routine that he'd been involved in. A lot of people had gone there to visit him. He'd been documented many times. And there was a moment, one story that I like to tell in the kitchen, talking with Lee, and he was mentioning to me about going to these folk festivals. And that when there's working on the paperwork in the kitchen there, it's a contract to a festival at Berea College. And he mentioned to me that day about going to these festivals, and he said, he make sure that he had a good, like the right set of overalls, and he'd wear his boots and wear his hat and turn up his accent a little bit, and he put his thumbs under the straps of the overalls, and he put on this like stereotype guy. I mean, he knows what role he was playing there, and he was joking about that, and obviously completely self-aware. And to me, that's completely blew my mind. So that's I don't have much to add to that story other than that's what happened.
He was a consummate performer.
He was a performer, and he knew what the stage was, and he knew what his role was on that stage, and he was willing to play that role.
Vic's second question, Vic and Jeff's second question from Mark Breedlove. There are various themes of natural rhythm, natural motion in the content and editing. Was your editing influenced consciously by Sexton's music and the qualities of this tradition of music?
I don't know. It's a good question. Consciously, we were influenced by, certainly the music had a huge influence in the editing. Absolutely. I think that the music had a huge influence, but also the sounds of the landscape, the sonic landscape of the place had a huge influence on the editing. So those things in some ways were in dialogue and sometimes also in counterpoint with each other. And I think that we thought a lot about that. We thought a lot about musical vocabulary when we were editing the film, and that I think it became very intuitive in the way that we built the film out. One thing we did determine quickly, if I'm not mistaken, is that we never wanted to do musical overlays with visual montage of imagery. And I think that was an aesthetic decision that we made early on, after a couple trial and errors, and we just said, that's not for us. That's not staying true to the experience that we had. Vic, you have some more on that?
When I think about that, I mean, I think that's that's one of the smart decisions about this, and what makes it a unique documentary. And it also makes you realize that if you were to overlay music on top of the landscape, you would be covering up the landscape's music. And
interrupting at real time. You'd be
it's a very
multitasking.
right. It's a very specific decision that has that very specific in the moment effect. So, but that's a great question about just how much does the subject influence the form, the content influence the design.
I'd want to add to that too that we would watch we'd put things together and watch them and see if this was this going to be our film, and the measure that we had to go against was our experience of being in the place, and that's all we had. Neither one of us are experts in this music or in any one thing that would we're people who have an experience in a place, and we wanted to convey that. We wanted to tell the story of these people that we met and this place that we were in, and does this do it or not? And so then those types of that didn't do it. Overlaying sound like that didn't do it.
Yeah, and I think going along with that, and this comes back to your comment about timely, is the duration of some of the shots. We determined early on that if we cut shots too short, we'd lose the essence of them, and so we opted for less cutting and more sort of long takes, and let things kind of unfold over time. Even if that unfolding of time and unfolding of events were micro events or things that weren't particularly dramatic in terms of their happenings, they're small things. There's something still to be learned from those, and so we said let's let the spectator also learn from those small experiences.
That's great. Here's the third and final question. It's coming from GL Faulkner. Thanks, guys. What are your hopes for the film going forward now that Lee has passed on? Where does it fit into the sometimes contentious discourse of traditional music and the figures within it?
Well, I want people to see it. I want people to see this film. I want people to be able to have the experience of seeing it, to know what they can learn from this film. I hope. I mean, that's what I'd be saying. And as for I mean, it is, of course, there's all the questions of representation, and I think anybody is certainly, and you can have your own opinions on things, of course. We did the best that we could to present something that, as we encountered it, to present something. And this is another thing about having long shots, that it's less of art. For a while we did have, we called them they were close-up shots of objects in the room, and we were training your eye into these places, and we eliminated those because we felt it was too much guiding. We wanted the viewer to have the power to look within the frame, and of course we're placing the camera and we're editing, but as much as we could, we stood back from the subject and to allow the subject to speak literally without speaking over the subject. So, so our intention was to present what we saw. We did our best.
I think that we just to echo off of this desire for it to be seen. We're gonna extend the screening time of that Vimeo link. We'll discuss it again before we say goodbye for some more time, so more people can tune into it that didn't get a chance to see it. And I do think that it's an important question of like, how do we get these kinds of works out there in the world? Because, you know, this isn't going to make it on Netflix. We have to be honest that our film is, it's a slow moving, it's a slow burn. It's not an action movie in the sense of the word that we've come to know about action films. And it requires more investment from the spectator. That's clear. And that's part of the deal that we ask from the first shot, as Lee mentions. And so it makes it a harder uphill battle for us as you know, as filmmakers to get this out there to be seen. But I think that it's worth spreading the word, and we rely on the spectators who have seen it. We rely on the viewers who are touched by it in some way to tell others to check it out. And I think that's the word of mouth way, as has been the way with music, Appalachian music, and but you know, underground music as well. It happens through people sharing it, and I think that that's what we rely on, people trying to get the word out about Lee, and hopefully that'll help to raise his status into this discourse of the history of the music to its proper place. And if our film can help in some way on that, it's great.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh, guess what? Encore. Fourth question, final question from Josh Goldman. Hi, great movie. Heard an hour of Lee's music on an internet radio show. Mountain music? Question mark. Mountain music, yes.
Sure. Call it what you want. So the question is this mountain music or not?
Maybe it was the radio show. I'm not sure, but it's I'm so glad that this listener, this viewer, thought that it was a great movie. And it's like Jeff and Vic say, it's streaming live, and you know, pass the link along to people, and to give voice to an important person, and without speaking over that voice is the film's project. And I believe that it was successfully done, and really great to have this at such a, you know, a time of loss. Is there a final word of that you'd like to give before we head out?
If you look in the there's some words just below the frame that we're speaking in that should have a way. I spoke with Lee's son Johnny yesterday, and he asks if people want to make a donation that would be welcome directly to the funeral home in Whitesburg. It's called I think it's Letcher Funeral Home. I don't have the words in front of me, but you can read them both on our Facebook. We've got that information, and it should be, I think, here. But they do ask if you feel moved, they would appreciate that. Johnny would, and we're happy to help with that. And I'd like to thank you, Lee, and I'd like to thank everybody for looking at the film. It's a pleasure sharing it, and it was, I mean, it was made to be shared with people. It was made from a desire to communicate about two very beautiful people, Lee and Opal Sexton. And at this time of loss, our thoughts are with Opal, and
Yeah.
Thank you all for
Thanks
creating
again,
this.
Lee.
Yeah, and my pleasure. My absolute pleasure. 4:06, right on time.
406.
Thank you for allowing me to moderate this conversation and to dive back into this film again. Thank you, everyone, and see you around. Till soon.
My pleasure.
Okay. Goodbye.